I don't feel as though it does take superheroes to deliver stuff such as entrepreneurial activities within a business. I think it can be done by anyone.
And certainly, we've both been entrepreneurs, so you can't be a superhero because we're definitely not.
Well, neither of us are wearing capes today.
Good morning, everyone. I'm here with Nick this morning. Nick, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks very much, Tim. Hi there. So my name's Nick Miller. I work in financial services, and I'm also a member of the Circle of Entrepreneurs with Tim.
Intrapreneurship. What does that mean to you, Nick?
So entrepreneurship for me is about how individuals can help solve real-world problems whilst also creating a profitable business within a large corporate infrastructure. So unlike entrepreneurship, which everyone's very familiar with, entrepreneurship for me is very much how can any individual in an organisation with a really good idea actually deliver impact.
And you're an entrepreneur yourself, right? That's correct.
Yeah, that's right, Tim. So I started out on my entrepreneurship journey, as people like to call it, about 2 years ago now with a team of graduates from within my company. And we were looking at how to innovate really to allow society, really focusing on the UK here, become more financially literate and help them achieve their life goals, which were incurring social problems. So we were primarily focused on two things, which is one, the retirement crisis and also the housing issue, with people really struggling to get onto the property ladder and actually allow them to generate what was primarily the Route 1 direct means of generating wealth within the UK of previous generations. But unfortunately, now that is very much now not the case, with it being so difficult to land yourself on the property market with sky-high prices and a not so favourable macroeconomic outlook for millennials such as ourselves. So started that about a couple of years ago with a team of graduates and went through various incubators. I worked with a series of consultants who were helping us really develop the minimum viable product and actually get our concept really quite rigid, to both address that social issue but also have a viable business plan which could profitably be scaled to the mass market.
That's interesting, because you mentioned that you started this idea when you were still on the graduate scheme. Traditionally, people might expect that people that kind of at that level in the organisation wouldn't be the source of great ideas. So what do you think about that?
No, it's a really good question, because usually you hear about these great innovations coming out, all these big tech companies coming from the kind of like genius mastermind at the top of the triangle. But actually, what was great within my organisation is that it allowed I suppose everyday Joes, the people from all across the seniority levels within the corporate, to actually be able to start developing ideas and lead them on the roadmap to start actually creating impact. And to be able to get that opportunity from such an early stage of my career was really quite exciting.
That's interesting, but at the same time, I imagine if you're still quite young in the organisation, then the chances are you're going to have smaller network, probably less political clout, certainly less seniority than people that are a bit more ingrained in the organisation, that have been there for longer, that have that more experience. Do you think that there are particular difficulties for trying to deliver something from that kind of more junior, more youthful level of the organisation?
Oh, of course. I mean, it goes without saying that for those such as myself in the organisation at a more junior level, we don't have the sway or the influence which senior managing directors within any large corporation or business have quite naturally, and that's very understandable. I think where we really struggle as a team is actually once we've come up with the idea and we've managed to get the right stakeholders and the right level of senior sponsorship, it's actually that delivery roadmap which is the real struggle to be able to actually work towards whilst managing your BAU day to day. And so what I've really struggled with is actually managing to make tangible progress whilst being able to manage your career, manage your job, manage everything else which you've kind of got on the side of your desk. As
your millennial burnout scenario.
It could potentially lead to that, and I think for a lot of people, I see them trying to manage too many side hustles at the same time, and that simultaneous balance of life just becomes too much, and they're unable to cope with it.
As someone with two side hustles, I sympathise. Don't worry. But I think it's an important point, because in in entrepreneurship literature, there's a really important piece of discourse around the corporate immune system. So that is the fact that when you create these ideas, when you come up with something new in an organization, there tends to be all these structures in place that, for the best will in the world, are there to protect the organization, but from an entrepreneurship perspective can actually be quite blocking. And depending on how virile that immune system is, it can actually be quite threatening at times. So I don't know if you've had any particular interactions with the corporate immune system.
Oh no, I mean, I think just about every entrepreneur has in some form or another, unfortunately. And yeah, it's counterintuitive because I think a lot of organizations, they really promote this idea of everyone innovating and everyone like sort of really embracing entrepreneurship, and all the ideation, everything's really encouraged. But actually when you take it into reality and it comes to delivery stage, and all the checks and balances and hurdles which you have to go over, it makes it really, really difficult. And I think that's potentially where innovation and creation from across the organisation, from everyday people who come up with good ideas, is unfortunately stifled.
I think it's a really important point, Nick, and I think that there's this inherent tension in organisations between autonomy and control, right? And they've got to try and balance that, right? And I think traditionally organisations are not set up to cope with fast-changing external markets and external stimuli and all that sort of jazz. But if you were to remove one part of the corporate immune system, or if there was one thing that you think organizations, or particularly the organization you're in, could do better to allow you to deliver your idea, what would it have been?
I think for each business area, because as we discussed about, we want to see entrepreneurs flourish from across organisations rather than just in some shed in the side of the business to allow sort of the innovation team, as they often are, to kind of go wild with blue sky thinking. For me, it would be about empowering individuals in a way which was in the risk tolerance of a company, but does accept to a certain extent that actually, unless you really do go about challenging sort of the status quo, actually allowing ideas to flourish and creating that foundation where ideas can actually be delivered. There is no risk without reward, reward without risk even.
I think that's part of the real difficulty and the tension of entrepreneurship, is that I think the departments that are most likely to be resistant to change and to innovation are the ones that you perhaps need to get on side very quickly. And I think there's a lot of writing out there about seeing those kind of functions as the blockers, but actually they're there for a reason, to protect the business. But do you sometimes think that organizations have structures that are designed to protect them, but actually those same structures might be the structures that kill them ultimately?
I mean, yeah, I think it's really almost a trade-off of the short term and the long term here, because as you say, you have these structures to protect the business, and they'll be thinking about, if this was to go to market tomorrow, what would be the headlines, what would be the impact on the balance sheet, on the P&L, and actually that may be very, very true, but in the long term, if you've got just a static traditional business model which is unable to innovate, which is unable to develop, then ultimately, you are sort of signing your own death warrant there. And I feel as though that you do, as you say, need to get those stakeholders on side. I think probably the biggest challenge for entrepreneurs is, one, your stakeholder management, but two, knowing when to try and get people on side and knowing when to challenge and say, actually, I know this has always been done this way, but actually we cannot continue like this. It is not sustainable. We do need to have a slightly wider level of comfort.
Absolutely. And I think, final question then. I read something recently in the Harvard Business Review, no less.
Very academic.
That said, yeah, I know. That said that entrepreneurs are a myth. Entrepreneurs are, the whole idea relies on these superheroes of the corporate sector to come forth and deliver stuff, when actually it's impossible and those people don't exist. What do you think about that, Nick?
So I read that article as well, actually, Tim, and I think it probably highlighted a lot of the problems which entrepreneurs do come across day to day. But I disagree with the fundamental argument that it has to be superheroes which need to deliver this. I think, unfortunately, that is possibly the truth at the moment. But with the right foundation, the right level of support, and the right sort of attitude from the business, and which I think in terms of the will, it's definitely there. People want to see the stuff happen, but wanting and enabling are two very different things, as we both know. And I don't feel as though it does take superheroes to deliver stuff such as entrepreneurial activities within a business. I think it can be done by anyone with the right training, with the right idea, and with the right support. And I think that's what entrepreneurship should all be about.
And certainly, we've both been entrepreneurs, so you can't be a superhero because we're definitely not.
Well, neither of us are wearing capes today.
I think entrepreneurship's all about ordinary people doing relatively ordinary things that ultimately lead to something extraordinary. And I think that's the real power of the movement.
Completely.
So Nick, if you think about your journey as an entrepreneur, what was one of the things that you found most difficult? And from that, what do you think is something that your organisation could do better?
Yeah, so I think like most entrepreneurs, the serious ups and downs, highs and lows with anyone's journey as
it's like
they
a game
try.
of snakes and ladders.
It honestly is like a game of snakes and ladders, and each turn is a roll of the dice. You're never really quite sure where you're going to end up. But the most important thing is having the right people to be able to support you and say, yes, we absolutely back you 100%. Please go away and do this. And I think the common thing which I hear, which is really good and needs to be promoted further, is as long as you get your day job done, I don't care what you do. In terms of actually how much time you spend on this. If you're getting your stuff done, fantastic, that's brilliant. And if actually you're going beyond your day-to-day or what was the minimum required of you to actually further the business, then that's fantastic. And I think the more that we can promote that attitude within the workplace, the better.
100% agree, totally agree. Thanks for joining me today, Nick.
Thank you very much.